Every dev who's ever had to come up with a custom email solution knows this for a fact. Email is the worst. Everything from composing HTML that looks like it was built in 1992 to actually sending the email, hooking everything up to your services can just be really laborious and a pain. That's why I'm excited to share with you Resend. Now, I've been playing around with Resend for a good bit now. It's been around for just under a year, and it just kind of revolutionizes modern email for developers. In this video, I'm going to give you 5 steps to get started with Resend. We're actually going to use Astro, my favorite front-end framework. I'll show you how to set up a dynamic JSON endpoint with server-side rendering, so you can actually hit this endpoint and dynamically send out emails from your Resend account. We'll do that in 5 steps. After that, we're going to go kind of superpowers. All right, we're going to actually show how to customize this from the front end. And then finally, I'll show you how to use React Email to compose these emails, loop through the data that you have, maybe from a database or something else, and then send the emails off. We'll even create some fun UI so you can actually see it send in real time. Now, if you're interested in Astro, I've got an early access course about to launch here in the next month or so, and then I'll continue to build it out in public. Now, if you're not interested in Astro, no worries. At the end of the video, we're going to walk through how to set this all up with React. So whether you use Remix or Next.js or just a plain old React app or something else, you should be able to get everything you need from the last half of this video. If you want specific help with Next.js, I will link a video in the description to Resend's own YouTube channel where they actually walk you through how to set it up. All right, you ready? Let's jump right in. Hey, what's up? My name is Chris and welcome to Coding in Public. All right, we're going to go ahead and start from scratch. That way you can follow along from step 1. So let's start by building out an Astro project. I'm going to go ahead and create a new project here with Astro with npm create Astro at latest. We'll call this something like Resend overview. And let's go ahead and start with an empty project and I'll install the dependencies and we'll go ahead and plan to write with TypeScript and I'll just use the strict setting and initialize a new Git repository. All right, just like that, we've got it ready. I'm just going to open this up in VS Code and be right back with you. All right, here we are. I've gone ahead and opened up my terminal locally here and just typed npm run dev to get this up and running over here. And as you can see, it's a very, very basic Astro site. Now we're going to walk through 5 basic steps to send your first email using Resend and Astro. To start with, the very first step is to set up an API key over here in Resend. I'm going to go ahead and pull this out just so I can see the side panel and we'll click API keys. I'm going to create an API key. Now you can name this whatever you want. Let's just call it like a sample key. And then I'll say full access and all domains is fine. Now, you can only see this once, and I'm obviously going to delete this afterwards, so don't share this with anyone because then they will be able to send emails as whatever domains that you've set it up for. But I'm going to go ahead and copy this, and then that brings us to the second step, and that is to come over here and add a .env file. This is where we'll save our API key so it's secure and doesn't kind of float around with our repo, and I'll show you how to secure that in just a second. Let's just call this something like resend API key equals, and then just paste that in directly. So the first step was to create the API key. We just did that. You cannot see this anymore. It's locked forever. And then obviously you can come over here and delete it, or you can edit the name if you'd like to as well. But that brought us to our second step, which is to create a .env file and add this key in there. Now you do want to make sure that your .getignore includes a .env here, so it does not commit this to your Git repo. Otherwise it's up on your repo, and that's kind of the point of a .env file, is that it stays local. All right, so that's the second step. The third step is to install the Resend package. So I'm going to come down here and just do npm I resend like that. Now I should mention that they've got SDKs for kind of everything. So if you want Laravel or Express or Python or Rails or any of these kind of stuff, you can easily tap into that. But obviously in this case, we're using JavaScript. So let's come in here and start this back up, npm run dev. So that was the third step, and that was to install Resend. Fourth, what we're going to do is create a dynamic API endpoint. Now, in Astro, you may not know this, but you can actually create API endpoints that are static files, like JSON files, and then do fetch requests to those endpoints. So you can do a GET fetch request, for instance. So let's go ahead and copy this over. And you can see that this needs to be in the pages directory. So let's go ahead and come over to src and pages, except in this case, what I'm going to do is create a new folder called API, and then I'll go ahead and paste in something like, let's do send email.json.ts. And I'll go ahead and just paste this in. All right, now you'll notice I'm getting these red squiggly lines, and that's because TypeScript doesn't know what to do with this. So let's do a couple of things. First of all, I'm going to go ahead and just convert this to an arrow function. So we'll say const get, and then let's make sure that this is async. And like I said, it's an arrow function now. Now what I want to do is also give this a type, and I can get this from Astro. It's called API route, like that. And if I just use the Astro extension, it should import that there for me. Now, I've got this at sendemail.json. That means I should be able to come right over this way and type API/sendemail.json. Now, as soon as I do that, you'll see I actually get this readout right here. Now, the reason I did API is because that's where we put it right inside this API directory, and that's just where I typically store these endpoints for myself. This all brings us to the fifth step, which is to actually send an email with Resend. Now to do this, we need to do a couple of things. First of all, I want to create a Resend instance. Let's just call this Resend, and we'll get it from new Resend. And this is actually the class we're going to get from the Resend SDK. Now what I want to do is just pass it my env variable. Now because we're using Vite, I can just import this directly. That's what Astro uses. So import.meta.env, and then I just pass it the name of the API key, resend_API. Behind the scenes, Vite will allow the server-side code to now access your API key. All right, now what I want to do is before we actually return a response, let's go ahead and send out an email. All right, so let's go ahead and capture this in a constant called send, and I'll just await the instance of resend.emails.send. And I just need to pass along an object with several different properties. First of all, I have to say where it's coming from. This would be chris@learnastro.dev, which is one of the domains I have set up on Resend. This is connected to my Astro course that's launching soon, so if you're interested in that, I'll leave a link in the description. You're welcome to sign up for that. Next, we need to send it to somewhere, so let's go ahead and send that to the same address, so chris@learnastro.dev. Then we can pass it a subject. Let's just say something like sample subject. And let's also pass along some HTML. This can just be a string of HTML, so let's have a paragraph tag, and let's just put something like hi. And then finally, the last thing I'm going to pass along is a text. So this would just be the plain text. So if for some reason somebody's blocked HTML, I can just go ahead and put plain text here and send that through. Now I will get one of two responses back from this. I will either get a send.data response or a send.error. So let's go ahead and do kind of a check off those two. So we'll just say if send.data, if that's one of the things I get back, then I'm going to return a new response. And all I'm going to do is json.stringify whatever that message is. So I should get an object back with a message that has an ID for the actual email that's been sent. So I'll just say send.data, and that will just assign it to the message property. Then let's come down here and go ahead and add a status as well. So we'll say status, and we'll do like 200, and status text, let's just say okay. All right, so that's if we get back data. Let's go ahead and copy this down and say what should happen if we don't. So if we get an error. In that case, I just want to send back the error. In this case, I do want to change this status code. We could do something like 500, and maybe there's a better one there, but we'll just say like internal server error. So something went wrong. Now, maybe to make this more comprehensive, what I can do is just say else here. So we'll say else. In other words, if I don't get data, then I would get an error back. And that way we can get rid of this final return and kind of handle all use cases. So either I get back data and it's okay, or something else goes wrong and I just pass back a status of 500. Now, right now this is a GET request. If I come back here and I hit send, so if I just refresh, you'll see I actually get back a message with an ID. That means if I come back over this way, let's actually expand this out just so we can see the sidebar again, and I go to my emails tab, you'll see I've actually sent that email out less than a minute ago. And if I click on this, it will show me both the HTML and the plain text. Now, this looks great right here, as does this, but you can see that it's actually sent it out and it's delivered it. So just like that, we've sent our first email. And that was the fifth thing I wanted to show you. Now let's make this actually useful. And what I want to do in this case is set up some kind of front-end logic so I can click a button and then send out emails to multiple different types of people. Obviously, you're probably not going to want this on some kind of GET endpoint. But in order for us to use other endpoints like a post endpoint, we need to actually be using server-side rendering. So in Astro, you can do that in a couple different ways, but what I'm going to do is just install one of the possible adapters, and that would be the node adapter. So we'll say npx astro add node. So I'll hit yes to install those dependencies, and then I will update my config as well. So npm run dev now should allow us to use post routes as well. So what I'm going to do is just change this to a post route, and that way somebody can't just invoke it by going there, and we'll have to actually post to it. And there's obviously other checks you'd want to do too. For instance, Astro provides middleware, so you'd probably want to have some kind of authentication between the person clicking the button and the actual route going out. So that's another thing you'd want to add, but I just want to show you how to get started with Resend and then let you kind of figure out some of those details. If you're interested in like a full walkthrough, I would encourage you to look at my course because we'll probably do something very similar to this as one of the final builds in the project. Now, simply by changing this to a post request, now when I make a post request to that endpoint, the sendemail.json endpoint, it will actually choose this function and run it. So very simply, let's come back over here to the index page and let's just add a button. So here I'm just going to say send email, and then let's just use vanilla JavaScript. What I'm going to do is just grab access to that button. So document.querySelector. Let's just grab the button. Obviously, I wouldn't do this. Normally, you'd want to have some kind of ID or something. But in this case, I'm just showing you a quick example where we click, and then we're going to send an endpoint here. So all I'm going to do for now is just await fetch. And we're just going to fetch the API send email.json endpoint. Now, obviously, the method here needs to be post. Let's just go ahead and add some headers as well. And in order to await this, I do need to come up here and make this a sync. And then let's go ahead and pass along a body. Now here I'm going to json.stringify. we're going to pass along an object. In fact, it's going to look very similar to the object we already have over this way. So let me go ahead and grab all of this, and we'll just add this over this way. So now I'm sending a post request, and I'm sending all this as my data. So let's come back over this way, and let's go ahead and comment this all out right now. So I'm going to come in here and just comment this out so we can just kind of see what we're getting and go from there. Let's come back up top here. What I'm going to do is get my body from the await request.json. So in other words, I'm going to grab the body that's been passed in. Now what I want to do is pick off certain properties from that, right? So I've got a bunch of things on here. I know I've got to, I've got from, I've got HTML, I've got subject, and I've got text, right? So we can get all of these from the body. And just so we can see this, I'm going to go ahead and grab all of this right here. We'll just console.log all this. And because this post request needs some kind of returned response, what I'm going to do is just come down here and I'll paste in that old response that used to be here. All right, so with that said, we should be able to come back over this way, and when we click on this, we should send this post request with all this data and then see a console log in the actual server-side console down below. And the reason this is going to be server-side, again, is because this is a post request that this dynamic API endpoint is handling. So let's actually move back all the way to the homepage, and we're going to see our nasty button. There it is. So let's go ahead and open up the terminal locally here, and I'm going to click Send Email. Now, as soon as I do that, you'll see I get this console log of all the stuff that I passed in. So that means we're getting exactly what we expect. So let me get rid of all of this, and let's uncomment out all of this right here. And I'll come back up top here, and what I would do is just replace all of these with the things I get in, the to, the from, the HTML, all that kind of stuff. So let's go ahead and do that. And now because the properties here are named as the same thing as I'm passing in my body, I can just do from, and it will do from : from. All right, so that's just normal JavaScript stuff. I probably do want to do some kind of check here. So I could say, like, if some of these things don't exist, so maybe let's just grab all of these right here, and I'll just say if to doesn't exist, and then instead of this comma, let's go ahead and do or all these other things don't exist. So I'll do that quickly and be right back with you. So if any of these things do not exist, let's go ahead and return a new response. In this case, we don't need to pass along a body, but I will go ahead and send along a status of 404, and then we'll pass along a status text of something like did not provide the right data or something like that. All right, so I'll go ahead and do that, save this, and now what I'm going to do is we should get back something when we click this button, right? So let's go ahead and capture this perhaps, and let's do this in a try catch just to kind of do what we should be doing here. So I'll catch any errors. We'll just console.error. If there is any errors, we'll go ahead and do that. And then let's capture this in something like const res equals. And then once we get back that response, let's capture it in a constant called data. We'll just await res.json. And then finally, let's just go ahead and take the data right here, and then let's just console log the data that we get back. Okay, so with that said, we should be able to click, and it should send a fetch request to this API endpoint along with all of our data. That data should then be captured right here, and assuming that it exists, it will continue on down this way and send the email, and then send us this response right here. If it doesn't exist, it should error out on us, which we'll test in a second if I remember, and then if there is an error with the actual service, it will send us this server error. So let's go ahead and try it, and I'm going to open up the, let's see, this is all going to be client-side JavaScript, so let's open this up, console up over here, and if I click here, we should finally get a response back down this way. There we go, our message came back, and there you go, we got our ID. That means if I come back over this way, it should show me that this has sent out as well. And there you go. Another one has been sent out. So we've now hooked it up with server-side rendering so we can dynamically send across data. Now, obviously, you'd probably want some kind of data file that you're then looping over. Maybe it's from your database. And then on the front end, you have some kind of back-end auth route where you can send emails to certain people based on certain criteria. Now, let's do that final thing I promised in the intro, which is to actually create a dynamic email with React. So to do that, we need to do a couple of things. I'm going to go ahead and close this down. In Astro, we can use different frameworks, UI frameworks like React, but we need to install them first. So I'll do npx astro add react. It will ask to install all the dependencies, which I'll let it do, and then it will update my config file and my JSON file. The other thing I need to do is install something called React Email, and this is by the exact same team. It's at react.email. Super interesting. If you've ever had to write your own custom email solutions, you know how much of a pain in the butt it is. React Email makes this super, super easy. So I'm going to go ahead and come back over here, and we're going to just type in a few things. So we're going to do npm I React Email. Then we also need the components themselves, which we're going to use to build the email. And then we're also going to use the render function to render this out both to plain text and to HTML and send that along to our API endpoint. All right, so those all installed. Let's just npm run dev and get this thing back up and running. Now in Astro, obviously you'd have some kind of route probably that would be guarded, and that would be where all your email sending comes from. So let's go ahead and create a component up here. We're going to call this components, and then inside here we'll say something like email form.tsx. And I'll just scaffold out a quick component over this way. Now back in the index route over here, what I need to do is actually get that on my page. So we can do that very simply with email. And this should auto import here. You can hit Control and Spacebar if it doesn't, and then drop that in there directly. So it says email form. That's actually coming from my TSX file right over here. Now, if I want to be able to do dynamic stuff in here, in other words, I don't just want static HTML from the JSX that I'm using, I actually need to add a client directive on here. So we can do client load. And what that means is it'll actually load a React along with the HTML. So it'll hydrate it right away on page request. Now let's go ahead and get rid of this send email button, which obviously means nothing here will work, but that's okay. We're going to actually move this over to our file anyhow. All right, so inside this email form, I'd like to do two things. First of all, I want to actually show the email we're going to write. So for that, I'm going to come over to React Email and grab one of their examples, just so that we don't have to kind of do this manually. So we've got a bunch of different options down here. Obviously, none of these images will work because they're all relative to this particular site, but let's just grab, I don't know, let's grab one of these. How about this koala one? And if I come over here to the source, it'll actually show me the React. So you can see it's just a bunch of components. And this is that package we installed, React Email Components. As we scroll down here, you'll see that it just adds all these components, and in the end, it renders this HTML. So I don't know about you, but I don't want to write tables, and so I'm not going to. Thankfully, React Email can do that for us. And then you can also render it to plain text, so it will look something like this as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and grab this source. I'm just going to copy it here to get started, and then let's go ahead and create a second component over here. And in fact, maybe let's put this in its own directory. So we're going to have an emails directory, and then inside here, let's create this like sample email.tsx. And then I'll go ahead and paste all of this in. And then let's go ahead and just take this koala welcome email. I'll hit Command-Shift-L to grab all of those and change this to say sample email. Okay, so now that we've got that, we can render it on our own site. Now, the only thing that we need to pay attention to here is this base URL. They're actually using this just locally to basically connect to their own site. What I'm going to do is replace all of this here with my own custom image. All right, there we go. And I'm going to come over here and change this to like 181 to 260. We'll call this Astro Course. All right, now what we can do is we can optionally pass in a username. It will then filter this down. And again, I'm not going to walk through all of this. I've done a video on React Email before, but basically it has these components like HTML and then a head, a preview, which shows at the kind of top section of people's email on some clients. Then you've got the body itself that has a container with images, text. All these texts are always wrapped in this text here. See, we've got a button. I'm not sure if this is old styling the way that they used to do these components, but PX doesn't look like it exists anymore. So this might be a little screwy. We might have to mess with that, and that's just fine. It looks like it's just padding 12, so maybe we could just do that below. And that gives me a chance to show you this as well. So down this way, you can see we've just got like CSS in JS. So let's find our button, and here let's go ahead and add padding. And this was what, 12 pixels, I think? Okay, so hopefully that's all right. Let's come over here though. And now what I want to do is inside this div, the first thing I want to pull in is my sample email. So sample email like that should pull right in. And then we should be able to render that directly on the page. So there you go. We get it all showing there. Looks like I messed this one up. It looks like maybe closer to like 200, so a little bit closer. There we go. All right, something like that. But now you can see how it's dynamic and actually on the page, and I can render it as an actual component. Now, I can come over here and I can pass it something, right? I can pass it the user first name, and I can say Chris, and then suddenly it updates to say Chris, right? So just normal React stuff, right? Now you'll notice we're getting some errors, and that's because it's actually rendering an HTML tag inside this other HTML tag, so it kind of doesn't really know what to do, and that's all right. I just want to show you what it will look like. Okay, so now that we've got that, let's get rid of that. We are going to allow it to still import because we're going to use that here when we submit our form in a second. So the second thing I want to do is now duplicate the functionality we had in vanilla JavaScript here with React. And we'll do one better because I'm going to allow you to have dynamic names and email addresses. So if I come in here and add a form, we'll just get rid of this action for now. And inside here, let's just very simply have an input that has a type of text, and the name will be equal to name. And we'll do a placeholder for name as well. Now, if I move this down, we're going to change all of these to email. So email, email, and email. Obviously, if this was a true form that like a client was using, you'd want to have these in labels and all that kind of stuff. But we're just trying to really quickly sketch something out. Next, we're going to have an input, type of submit, and here we'll just have it say send email. So what we want to do is when we add our own custom name and custom email, and we click send email, it will actually hit that endpoint for us. So I'm going to come over here and add an on submit. We'll just pass this to a function we're going to write called handle submit. And I'll come up top here and let's just write this out. So const handle submit, and here let's go ahead and capture the event itself, and then let's just e.prevent default. Now to make TypeScript happy, let's go ahead and come in here and we'll just type this quickly as react.form event. And this will be an HTML form element. Now, when we submit it, we should get all of this stuff down here, right? In fact, maybe what we want to do is make sure that these are required. And obviously, you could do a lot more niceties there as well, and some things that you need to do for accessibility. But in this case, what we'll do is just grab all the inputs here, the name and the email. We can do that very easily by using the form data API. So I'm going to just put this in a variable called form data, lowercase, and then we'll do a new form data, and we'll pass it the e.currentTarget. Now what I can do is come down here and abstract all those out. So it puts it, I think it's in a map is how it works. But what we can do is just extract out the ones we want. So we can do name and email. And then here we'll do object.fromEntries. And we'll pass it the form data variable we have up top. Then finally, let's just go ahead and console log out here, the name and the email. All right, so hopefully we did all that correctly, but what I'm going to do is type in my name, and I'll type in an email, and then when I hit enter, it should run this handle submit function. Up here, it's going to prevent the default, so it won't refresh the page. Next, it's going to grab anything that we've submitted on the form, and then just destructure out the name and the email from the object that we'll recreate from this form data map. So I'm going to go ahead and hit send email, and there we go. We got Chris and chris@codinginpublic.dev. So we're all set up to make this super dynamic. So now that we've got those things, let's go ahead and come down here. We're going to have a little try catch. And here we'll just console.error, the error, whatever gets passed in. All right, now we have all this stuff down here, right? So let's go ahead and redo this. See, I guess we had a try catch as well. We didn't have to redo all that, but let's grab this inside here. And then I'll just go ahead and get rid of this entire script tag. All right, so back over this way, let's add all this to the try. And then in order for this to be await, we need to make sure that we've gotten a sync function up here. All right, so assuming we did all that right earlier, now I can just come in here and replace this too with the email that we're going to pass in. And when it comes to the name itself, we're going to actually have to render that with the React, which we'll do in just a second. And I guess maybe to make sure that the name is coming through too, let's come inside here and I'll go ahead and add the name here. Now you do need to change these to backticks. I just have an extension that does that. And there we go. So now I should be able to come in here and say Chris, and then chris@codinginpublic.dev. And then I'll go ahead and hit enter. It should submit all that and pass back our message, which it did. So perfect. Let's come back over here then. And right here are our email logs. You'll notice I actually did this a little bit ago and had to come back to it. So let's refresh it. There we go. It's sample email right here. And it says sample Chris. So we know it actually delivered properly and even allowed us to dynamically pass in some data. Now the last step is to hook up that React email form. So this HTML and the text are where we need to change that. So let's go ahead and come up top here, and I'm just going to add a new constant here. We'll call final HTML or something like that. And here we can use a function that we're given by React email called render. That's one of the ones that we actually installed. Remember that? React email render. And here we can pass it, first of all, a component, an actual React component, and then we can pass it a few options. So we've already got our React component, this sample email here, and the user first name, I can just pass it the name, right, that we got from the form. Now, because it doesn't know what kind of thing it is, what kind of value, we need to actually type this as a string just to make TypeScript happy. Now, I can also pass on an optional options object. And here, let's just go ahead and say pretty print. So this will actually print out the HTML so it's nice, and we'll set this to true. All right, so that's the first thing we need is the final HTML. Let's copy this down one more time, and we'll say final text here. Because we can also, instead of passing pretty print true, we can pass it a plain text Boolean. And here I can say true. So I want this to be plain text down here. Here I want this to be the final HTML. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this final HTML, and we'll just set it equal here to the HTML here. And then here we'll say final text, and we'll set that equal to the text. All right, so let's go ahead and do this one more time. Come back over here, and just to make sure the names are different here, I'll say joe@chris@codinginpublic.dev, and then send the email. All right, it worked. Perfect. Let's go ahead and come back over this way and refresh. And there we go. We actually have the email showing right here. And if I click on this, it'll show us the full email text right here. There's the HTML. Here's the plain text, which is perfect. And there's the original source as well. So all this happened dynamically here as we submitted the form. Now there's so much more you can do with React email. You can actually use Tailwind if you prefer to do that. You've also got a bunch of flexibility with the components that they give you. All right, now that leaves just one final thing, and that would be to actually make a realistic thing here. So not a form, but actually looping through data like from a database or something like that. So what I'm going to do is actually get rid of all of this here. So that way it's just a send email button. And then above this, we're going to render out some actual content. So what I'm going to do is come up top here and just add a constant. This will be an array of items here where they have an email, a name. I'm sending them all to myself here just so I don't have to come up with fake email addresses, but you'll see I have different names on here as well. And then a sent Boolean, whether or not it is sent. Now what I want to do is come down here, and inside the email form, we're just going to have some state. So here I'm going to have data and set data. We'll set this equal to use state. And I'll pull that in from React, and then we'll set it to our DB data by default. Now we're going to update this as we go, But now what I need to do is come in here. We don't need any of this form data because we won't have that. This final HTML, all this we're going to actually get from the items here as we loop through them. So what I need to do is create a little tiny loop inside of here. So I'll take my data, and for each of my data points, I'm going to do a bunch of stuff, and it will basically look like this, right? So let's cut all that out, and I'll come up top here, and for each of those things here is where we're going to do all this. Now that also means I need to make this a sync. And now for each of these things, this data right here, so let's come in here, I can do d.name, right? And I'll do the same thing right here. So we're going to render out HTML for each of these individual people. Now there are of course other ways you can do this, especially if you have a large quantity of people you're sending this to, but for now this will work for our use case. So I'll say d.email. And then here once again, I'll say maybe something better here like hi, and then whatever this person's name is, d.name. Now once this comes back, remember I'll get two possible solutions. Now remember I'll either get an error message, which will log down here, or I'll get data back. So assuming I have data, then why don't we just set our data state and flip that one variable. So I'll say set data. Here we'll take our previous. Then inside here, we just need to return an array. And here we'll just spread in the previous and map over each of those items. So we'll call it P. Then we can just say if the P.name equals the D.name. I know naming is my forte. We can come inside here and say return and spread in all the previous data and just update sent to equal to true. And then finally, just below here, we can say otherwise, just go ahead and return P. So hopefully that makes sense. All we're going to do is send it. And then assuming that we get data back, then we can just update our state to reflect that that has been sent. Now, to kind of get the full magic effect, let's come down this way and actually demonstrate that by showing the data itself. So let me come down here and let's first of all just check that we have some data. And once we have that, let's go ahead and just loop through all of our data. Now you can see what I'm doing is I'm just looping through all these things. I probably need to add a key here, which we'll do in just a second. But what I'm doing is just then displaying the email I'm sending it to, the name I'm sending it to, and whether or not it is sent. So let's come over here and first of all add a key. And obviously you'd want some kind of ID or something like that from your database. But for now, what I could do is just grab the email and make that my unique key. Now here's the thing, Astro makes it so easy to add things like Tailwind that I'm just going to go ahead and do that really briefly. So we'll say npx Astro add Tailwind, and it will just do all the magic for us. So I'll accept all of its prompts and it updates everything for me. I can do npm run dev and get this back up and running. And now, don't you already feel much better about that? I can come in here and say class name, and we could say something like grid gap of 4, space those out slightly. All right, good enough. Now it's time to actually test this out. What happens when I click send? Remember, it's going to come up here and actually loop through all the existing data I have. For each of those, it's going to output some HTML and some text and send that to our endpoints. Those endpoints will then fire and return data to us, assuming that it's true. In other words, it successfully happened. Then we'll update the state to reflect it over here. So if we did all that correctly, I should be able to come over here and click. And now they are all sent. Isn't that cool? So just like that, we sent all of them. If I jump back over this way, so there we go. We've actually got dynamic things, Chris tertiary, alternate, and Chris Pennington, my actual name. All right, so there we go. Really easy to get started with. And by having this dynamic JSON endpoint with Astro, we can actually do things like this server side and send emails from within an Astro project. Adding React on top of it is a nicety. And of course, now these look much better than they otherwise would. So much better than I could do by myself in that short of time. Well, I hope this was a big help. And once again, if you're interested in using Resend in a Next.js project, I'll link to the video from Resend's channel below that walks you through that. Well, thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Happy coding.